Welcome to Showbiz Chicago, the podcast. I am your host, Michael Roberts, and I have a returning guest and one of my dear friends, Ronald Keaton.
Hello.
Who is going to be returning to his one-man show called Churchill, based on you-know-who, at First Folio Theater. And you've already had one performance there, correct?
Yes, I did.
Back in February.
Yes.
So Churchill lives. This is what this run is
And
called.
he'll keep living for a while if I'm lucky.
And this is your baby. This is your pet project.
Yes, it is. It's
Could you take on something a little smaller?
No. If you're going to dream, you may as well dream big and fall on your butt.
Well, let's talk about it. What's your connection to Churchill? What draw you to this character?
Originally, I saw in the mid-'80s a PBS special about Churchill that was dramatized. It was written by a noted Churchillian scholar, Dr. James Humes. Dr. Humes' biggest claim to fame is he was the one who wrote the words on the plaque that was left on the first moon landing in 1969. We came in peace for all mankind. He wrote that. The English actor Robert Hardy was doing Churchill. And it just fascinated me to watch this man, and I have an addendum to this, twist and turn folks as he wanted, and people are just sitting there with their mouths open, smiling. John Gielgud was the host of that particular show, and it made such an indelible impression on me that I originally, in trying to put this together, tried to track down and see if anybody owned the script to the program. There was no copyright that existed on the script. I reached out to Dr. Humes, who now lives in Colorado, who is 89 years old.
I was going to say,
89 years old.
God bless Dr. Humes.
Still sharp, still mindful of his effect on and his interest in the Churchillian canon. And I asked him, you wrote this? He said, yes, I did. I wrote it, but it was a buyout. And so I don't know who owns the script. Turns out that no one copyrighted the script because there was so much previously copyrighted material in it that Churchill wrote that no one wanted to deal with.
Wow.
Now, the program that I saw has a copyright. In fact, that belongs to the noted defense contractor General Dynamics. But I don't care about that. I just wanted a shot at creating, my own version of who the man was and what he wanted to share. So from there, I started my research.
And what was your research besides, books?
Books.
We're talking about somebody that was accessible media-wise.
Yes.
So at least you had, and such a breadth of information.
All kinds of information available. I have read 3 different Churchillian biographies. I've seen television shows and films in which the Churchill character was influential on the plot. I hopped online. I wrote letters. There was a good, probably 2 years of research I did in trying to, number one, be faithful to who the man was, and number 2, offer something that would not artistically step on anybody else's toes.
Explain.
The Churchill estate is very proprietary on all the stuff that derives from the name and the image of Churchill. So as a result, they're not easy people to deal with. You can't do this, we don't allow this, so on, so on, so on, so on. So I had to negotiate through a minefield of sorts to realize that at the end of it, as long as I was able to put my own stamp on it and offer the material that I had chosen to theatrically recreate, it wouldn't be a difficult thing to do from the Churchill estate eyes. I hope I'm being articulate here. They don't like.
They don't want him dressing up in drag and going.
Bingo.
There you go.
Bingo. They want to maintain the integrity of the man and everything that derives from him. So
then, as an actor, when you have all this information in front of you, how do you parcel it away and say, I, as an actor, can get the truth out of this character by going in this direction or that direction?
It's not an easy thing to do, particularly with the volume of material to look at.
Because you're creating your own Churchill.
Yes, in essence, that's what I'm doing. Ostensibly, the man in this version is what I see of him. There's no way to avoid that.
It has to be.
It has to be, yeah. Plot-wise, it takes place in March of 1946. He has just been defeated for re-election in the very month that the Allies won the war, which to this day remains such a dichotomy in not just British history but world history. So he lost his bid for re-election, went back home to lick his wounds. This is a 72-year-old man who probably should have retired. Right. Most people do that. But he still had unfinished business. He received an invitation from President Truman to come to the States to possibly create a lecture tour of some kind. But in essence, what it ended up being was a move by Truman to enlist Churchill into assisting him in teaching the world how dangerous communism was becoming. So the play takes place in Fulton, Missouri, ironically or not, Truman's hometown, at Westminster College. That's what it's called. Or as Churchill says in his writings, I didn't know the college, but Westminster is a name by which I am all too familiar. And this is where he coins the phrase in his speech, Iron Curtain. These days, that kind of thing isn't taught in general history classes. You got to be a history major or a poli-sci major to realize the importance of that kind of thing. And from
those two words set the tone for, decades to come. Iron Curtain was what we came to know it as,
and
just visualizing it. It was
it's literary brilliance. Is what it is.
Yes,
it really is.
Yes,
to crystallize the concept of what was happening. He says from one place in the north to another place in the south, in Europe, everything east of there, an iron curtain has descended upon the continent. And as he says in his writings later, Iron Curtain, that's the phrase the press picked up, and I promise you it was not in the original text. Which tells you that even if you don't believe it, even if you think it was calculated,
right,
it was a brilliant stroke that you simply cannot deny, particularly when you look at the history of what happened after the war, with the building communist threat. 2 or 3 years later, the Berlin blockade, General Marshall being in charge of flying supplies to drop down into Berlin. All of this Churchill forecast by just saying those two words. I'm just fascinated by the prescience that this man had, not just in that moment, but throughout his life, as you will hopefully discover
Well, he was
in the play.
an artist, both of words and of format.
Yeah.
So let's talk about him for a bit. Born
November 30th, 1874, in a, as he says, a small bedroom of a very big house, Blenheim Palace.
He was rich.
Yes. His grandfather was the Duke of Marlborough. And so he was already born into royalty. He was also born 6 weeks premature. So, as he says, I'm paraphrasing, I was in a hurry. I was in a hurry to get into the world because I had so much to do.
And his mother?
His mother was American. Her name was Jenny Jerome. She was born in Brooklyn.
A Brooklyn girl.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a brilliant politician, a somewhat austere man whose relationship with his son was at best challenging. Churchill thought it was partially because of the lisp and stutter that he had as a boy, and partially because he tried so hard to please his father because he wanted his father's respect. And his father didn't grant that very often. As he says in the play, do you know how many conversations I had with my father in the lifetime? Maybe 5.
Wow.
And the one that he shares is about when he was a lad playing with his toy soldiers in the nursery. And his father walks in. He looks up and sees this man. And after a while, his father says, "Winston, would you like to be a soldier?" Winston says, "Yes, Papa." After all, what else could a descendant of the great Duke of Marlborough say? In his day, there were only basically 4 professions that someone in his position could be involved with: the land, the law,
The military.
the church, or the military.
Yep.
Right.
Wow.
So that's when he went into the military.
So let's talk about his travels. The man was everywhere, but India always fascinated him. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that a little bit. Because we were talking about Kipling earlier in the Jungle Book, and we're kind of around that same time period. What was it about the culture, do you think, that kind of touched his soul?
Well, that had to be acquired, because when he was assigned to India, his assignment was originally supposed to last for 20 years. He said that's not a service, that's a life sentence. And around that same time, when he was being sent to India, is when his father died very young, at the age of 45.
On what date?
January 24th, 1875. That has prescience here, and we'll talk about in a minute. So as a result, Churchill spent the rest of his life, in one way or another, trying to please his father. That's ironic, given that, the power, the towering representation of strength that this man gave the world, and it proves that he's just as human as anybody else.
And boy, and there's, like we were talking about before, on the hook for an actor. Doesn't it always boil down to something that everybody can connect to? No matter how big or powerful you are, you can understand that one simple notion of, I need to please my dad.
Exactly.
I need to please my mom. It doesn't matter if you're Winston Churchill or Joe Smith down the street. That's the connection.
And it proves that he was all too human, He was as ordinary as anybody.
Which is the other question I had for you. What, a man coming from such wealth that he did, how did he get a connection without a father figure, really, to the everyman? Because he really became a beacon for the ordinary working man.
Yes, he did. That's a question that cannot be answered simply, I think, because I mentioned earlier about the professions that basically a lad of his position could enter into. The reason why he went into the military was because his father basically said to his mother, "Well, Jenny, the lad owns no land. He's too stupid for the law. He's too obstreperous for the clergy." And so it was left for him to go into the military. So he went into the military academy Sandhurst, which is the equivalent of, at the time, of our West Point.
West Point.
He took the examinations to enter the military academy 3 times because he couldn't pass them. So that alone shows his doggedness in showing that I need to get somewhere. I'm going to do what I have to do to get there. A trait that a lot more of us might use, in daily life to begin with. The story goes that he studied hard for the geography question because it carried 20 points in the exam.
There you go.
He cut out all the names of the British dominions put them into a hat, pulled one out. It was New Zealand. He drew the country over and over again. Next morning, the examining officer puts the very first question on the blackboard: draw a map of New Zealand. As he says, it was like breaking the bank at Monte Carlo.
Right.
He not only sketched the country perfectly, he put in the railroads, the canals, the bridges, the libraries, the parks. He got all 20 points, and he says he squeaked into military school.
Now, we were talking earlier, through his artist side, because he was a great painter and all that, but he was also very depressed. Mm-hmm. Dark days. Almost manic.
Almost manic, exactly. He referred to it as a black dog hanging around his neck, and carried that concept all through his life. To be perfectly honest, if it was a lifelong affliction, as it seems to have been, it makes his accomplishments even more remarkable.
Absolutely.
And because he was carrying this around and he didn't tell anybody, except when you read his writings. It's not the kind of thing that would come up in daily conversation, with the Prime Minister of England.
But for him to recognize it, I guess,
yes,
for what it was, is an accomplishment
almost
in itself.
Self-diagnosis.
Yes.
And his wife recognized it. His wife had to have been a saint. With all the things, all the habits, all the peculiarities that we each have as people, when they're magnified more as a person in the public eye, she looked out for him constantly.
And she got the brunt of it.
Oh, she did.
So.
She did. A fascinating woman.
Clementine, we're talking
Clementine,
about.
I'm sorry, yes. His, or as they pronounce it across the pond, Clementine.
Clementine.
They met at a dinner party. And one meeting, he was totally taken by her personal grace, her beauty. The second meeting they were together, he knew that this was the woman that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Spent the next couple of years courting her, and then finally asked for her hand. They went to her mother. She said yes. And they were married in September of 1908. And as he says, lived happily ever after.
And how many children?
They had 4 adult children. They also had another child, a baby girl, whose name was Marigold, who died soon after childbirth.
Now, where in line did she fall?
I think she was 4th.
Okay.
if I remember correctly. I want to say 1921 is when she was born. Yeah.
And what was his relationship with his children?
Ironically, he had a better relationship with the girls than he did with his eldest, his son, whom he named after his father.
Because I'm sure he didn't. I mean, the son begets the father begets the son, begets the son begets the father.
Exactly. His son Randolph went into similar professions, journalism, politics, with mixed results. He had a daughter, Sarah, who was a highly regarded stage actress, and as he says in the play, she went into what people think is my natural profession, acting. And then his two younger daughters, Diana and Mary, each married politicians. So his family was close in one way because the public eye forces you to find that closeness. But in essence, Winston and Clementine, once the children were out of the house, basically lived their own lives. And the children went their own ways. It's not that like they didn't keep contact or anything, but the closeness that we might assume was not there in that family unit. And I'm wondering if that also can be attributed to Winston's depression. Because he didn't know how to relate to his children.
Right. It could almost force somebody out.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what is his relationship to the people proper and politics? Because he seems an apolitical person who becomes known. I mean, he's the head of the conservative movement.
Well, I can tell you this. There was no more opportunistic politician than Winston Churchill. He ran for office 14 times in his life, which is an unheard of number. And he won, I believe, 11 of them. Politically, he was able to go where the wind blew. Yes, he was in the vanguard of a conservative movement in England, and for the vast majority of his political career, he was part of the Conservative Party. Having said that, there was a time when he became friends with a future prime minister in the Parliament, David Lloyd George, and who was an avowed liberal bordering on socialism. They became very good friends, and Churchill turned his back on the Conservatives and joined David Lloyd George's Liberal Party. What today, I believe, if I know the lineage, would be called the Labour Party in England.
Correct.
And together, they were, as Winston was fond of saying, the Bobbsey twins of British liberalism. And they crafted a great deal of the legislation from which FDR drew to create his New Deal.
Yes.
And that's where the relationship was born between Churchill and Roosevelt.
Yes. And again, though, Ron, just his ability to connect with the common man, to somebody from such privilege, to be able to go through the minutia and cut out and weave programs that actually created a middle class, basically.
And he shared that quality with Roosevelt as well.
Yes.
He was regarded as a traitor to his class.
Right. All the political climates that were totally against that.
Totally.
Both Roosevelt and him.
And he, as he says, he relished the attacks. He loved nothing more than a good argument about something, particularly when he knew he was right.
Right. When people could argue a point.
Exactly. When they could.
When each had a point to argue without the
name calling or whatever. Yeah,
exactly.
Which nowadays seems almost, I don't mean to opine here, but it seems almost a peculiarly American trait right now, where we yell at each other as opposed to not listening to each other.
Yeah, right, talking past each other.
So,
how did World War I change him, do you think, and watching that annihilation? Because
It affected him deeply.
England was first up to bat with that.
Yes.
People forget. We came pretty late in the game on
Yes,
that
we
one.
did. We did. It affected him deeply because what he was concerned about from a practical standpoint, let alone his forecasting of how the war would begin. He said that the Germans would invade France through Belgium and that the war would last 4 or 5 years. He said, alas, I was right. The trench warfare in World War I, when soldiers would get hung up in the barbed wire and then be machine gunned down by the Germans, was something that he found abhorrent. He said that part of that war had nothing to do with glory and everything to do with evil. During World War I, he came up with an invention that his general staff scoffed at him for.
What was that?
It was a land ship that would travel great distances and be armed to obliterate the enemy in the way. Today we call it the tank. Most people don't know that.
I did not know that.
Churchill invented the tank. The thing that really affected him World War I wise was he was the First Lord of the Admiralty. He sent, in a particular battle, he sent soldiers and sailors up the Dardanelles Straits to ostensibly try and knock Turkey out of the war. Turkey was Germany's ally, and Churchill thought it would be easy to get them out of the way. But there was no backup plan for Churchill's initiation in that. The greatest soldier of the day, Lord Kitchener, was the head of the army, and he waited, according to Churchill, he waited far too long. So when those soldiers ended up on the Gallipoli Peninsula, the Germans had already bolstered the positions at the end of that peninsula and were shooting down on the British Army, wiped them out. Everyone blamed Churchill for that. And that was the first time he was cast into what he called later the wilderness of politics, because no one took him seriously. No one would listen to him. Even though everything that was coming out of his mouth in that realm was absolutely spot on. And so that exacerbated not only his depression, but his standing in the country. So he retreated back to his estate and started over.
And how does that manifest in Churchill, the show, what we just talked about?
He uses...
And actor-wise for you.
Yeah. He uses going back home as a tool, not only to rebuild his political career, which took a long time, but also rebuilding the practicality of where he was living. He built a house and cottage on his estate. The estate is called Chartwell, Chartwell. He designed waterworks for a collection of exotic goldfish. He built a huge garden wall. He immersed himself in the reinvention of who he was in order to find his way back politically. It's a fascinating thing. And he came up with this on his own. You know, he had no one to talk to. He didn't have any friends in politics anymore.
Right. There's no David Axelrod for him.
No, not at all. And so the fact that he could do that and still find his way back to the realm that he loved best, politics, is a tribute not only to his own brilliance, but to I suppose, being a bit grandiose, the potential in all of us to come back from failure. What are you going to do when you fall down?
Right.
You have to get up. He took his time, but he got back up. And he was knocked down so many times politically, and somehow or another found the strength, the resolve, the method to keep himself relevant throughout his entire career. Because even in the down times, people knew who he was. People would go to him for counsel politically. What do you think about this? And it was he was unlike anybody else, with very few exceptions that I can think of, politically in the 20th century.
And he knew how to use the media. With his radio broadcast.
He was a master.
I think that's the connection he had with the people too.
He and Roosevelt both,
Absolutely.
at the same time, talked to the people through the media. There were very few broadcasts from the House of Commons in those years, the war years.
Mm-hmm.
So he would have to go to the BBC studios to broadcast. And, they were a lot like Roosevelt's fireside chats. So I don't mean to keep coming back to that relationship, but as the war went on, that had to have been the most important political and military relationship in the entire war.
Yes.
Between Churchill and Roosevelt.
Yes. That Ron, and it's the simple notion, and radio was so new back then,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in your home. So you had that voice in your home.
Yep. I mentioned earlier that most people don't realize that Churchill had a lisp. Churchill had a stutter. He so mastered how to mask it by his delivery that people didn't even realize that they were listening to someone who was fighting a lifelong battle with judgment from those two maladies. But he was able to do it through what he was saying, not how he said it.
Right. All in the phrasing. All in the phrasing.
Yep.
Let's talk about his art.
He was a lifelong, and I have to admit, this is my favorite part of Churchill's story. I love this. I opened the play with Churchill sitting at an easel painting. He loved oil painting. He had over 400 paintings in his lifetime.
Was he self-taught?
Yes, he was. Pretty much. He read about technique like anybody else would, But
it's like dancing. Either you can do it or you can't.
Exactly. It's not that he was a great painter. What his enthusiasm was about was how to enjoy painting. He has
the process.
Yes. He has a famous essay about painting as a hobby, in which he basically says everyone should have something to divert your thoughts from the process of everyday life.
Right. George W. quoted that very line.
Yes. And so his became painting. And he became not only very good at it, but he was an advocate for painters, artists. All the fine arts. Here's something most folks don't know about Churchill. He loved all music. But he went out of his way to listen to two things. One, old-fashioned English music hall, comic, patter songs and that kind. He loved that stuff. And the other, which I'm just endlessly fascinated by, he loved hot jazz. In Paris, when Django Reinhardt and Stéphane Grappelli formed their quintet. In the few times that he was able to get to Paris, he would go to that club every night just to listen to those men play. I found this information out from an article that I read about Stéphane Grappelli, who said we'd see Churchill in the audience quite often when he was in the city. I don't know the identification.
I can almost answer that.
Okay.
Artist to artist, or actor to actor, is that with jazz, I mean, he's a man of he created his own rules, right? That's what you do with jazz. You create, I mean, the basic form is there,
Yeah.
but then you can improvise and create right around.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so new.
It was very new.
I mean,
And I think that may have been part of the appeal.
Yeah.
The fact that no one else had done it or tried it before, at least in that way. Just a sideline, that Grappelli happens to be one of my favorite jazz artists. You know, I'll sit and listen to him forever. That artistically pointed and elegant jazz violin that he played. I could sit and listen to it.
How about painting? Have you started painting?
I have not done that. I'm still a little afraid of that, although I will tell you, in the play, I bought all the things that a painter needs. So one of these days, I may be sitting down and trying.
Yeah, I think for an actor, that might be a good place to go.
It might be, yeah.
You know? So take us through, how long did his wife live? And how is that addressed?
I can't remember exactly when it was, but he died first.
He did die first?
Yes, he did die first. It wasn't long afterwards that his wife passed away. But she was with him right to the end.
90?
He was 90. And I believe he was 5 years older than she was.
Wow.
So they both lived, you know, they both had the genes to go on, which is fascinating because his father died at 45. Churchill died at 90.
And
70 years apart on the very same day.
And how do you foreshadow that in the play? How do you foreshadow as Churchill?
Yeah, in the play, right before he goes to India, he talks about his father passed away at the age of 45, so young. All that was left for me was to live in his memory and try to finish the things that he wanted to finish. It was the irony here is that he died on January 24th, 1875. Churchill often thought that for some strange reason, to make his journey to making his father happy complete, he would often believe that he would die on the same day, which is exactly what he did 70 years later, at twice his father's age. It's fascinating.
How has the show made you a better actor? And what as a human being do you take away from Churchill that you live your life with every day?
As an actor, I have been reminded about how valuable the relationship between actor and audience really is. I don't care who you hear it from or how it manifests itself. The only real reason an actor does his work is to share it with the people who's watching.
That's right.
You know, we can have all the artistic intention and delivery that we wish, but the point is to share it. So even in a solo performance, you are not alone. You can't afford to be. You know?
It's not meant to be.
No, it's not. Not at all. How it's changed me.
How has it changed you? What have you learned from Churchill?
The concept of reinvention.
Wow.
As I have gotten older, I have, as lucky as I've been, and I've had experiences that so many other people will never have, and I know that. And I hope that doesn't sound arrogant.
No, it's...
But...
An actor is a privileged life because you get to inhabit other people's souls.
And you do it by choice.
That's right.
So if you choose that life, you have to commit to it.
Yes.
I said reinvention. What this has done for me is to remind me that as we get older, we learn so much more by finding out what else we can do. I've always had a fascination with solo performance, but I never really acted on it until the last 4 or 5 years. Partially because of necessity, and partially because it helped me fight stage fright. That's a secret that I would never tell 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I had a pretty strong problem with stage fright throughout the 90s, the late 80s into the 90s. I don't know where it came from. I mean, at the time. Since then, I've had my own life examined and understand it a bit. But the fact remains that I would pull somebody aside in a cast, and I'd say,
help me out.
You know, you got to know this. I can't tell anybody else, so you have to know this. And they would look at me, and they would be kind enough to say, sure, I'll watch your back, that kind of thing. But you never really knew. So in my own preparation as an actor, I would often in those years need the solace of privacy. I needed to go into that corner by myself because I was petrified. I was petrified. But I couldn't not do the work I chose to do.
Okay.
So there's the dichotomy.
Which leads me to this question, and we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah, sorry.
No, this is one of my favorite interviews I've ever done, I have to tell you. How do you know when you're working on your own piece like this that you're not playing it safe as an actor?
Because the character won't let you.
That's the answer I thought you were going to get.
And I, you know, even though Churchill is a complex, difficult, challenging man to do, any character, if you've invested the time, the research, the ideas of development, the character will propel you to do what he or she wants you to do. That's the only logical way I know how to put it, because it's the only way I know how to work.
Right.
You know, and it's never failed me. And I don't ever, in the time that I continue to act, which I assume will be the rest of my life, I don't ever anticipate that failing me at all, because that's the relationship between the actor and the character he portrays. That's it's like a funnel. Now we need a bottle of scotch.
I think we do. And in closing, where would you like to see this show in 10 years?
I haven't thought that far, because I've always been someone who lived in the moment. But if it were my choice, I'm still young enough to do it on Broadway.
There you go.
We all got a dream.
And who would be your understudy?
Michael J. Roberts.
Thank you. So give us the dates one more time.
Out at First Folio Theater in Oak Brook, April 30th, May 2nd and 3rd. The show is almost sold out for all 4 performances.
As it should be.
I drop my jaw every time I say that.
As it should be.
But you want to get in touch with First Folio. Their phone number is 630-986-8067. Or go online.
Comes up on the screen.
Exactly.
Just like that.
Or go online and check out First Folio on the web, and you'll get all the information there.
Not to be missed.
I hope not, because I'm as proud of this as any work I've ever done.
As you should be. I adore you.
I appreciate this.